Well, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to our big room, our communal Zoom room. Um, so now that we are all back together in this main room, everybody has been muted again, and please remain muted through the program so that we can hear our speakers. Um, if you have questions, please put them into the chat box. I will be following the chat box throughout the conversation, as will Lauren. We'll be keeping an eye on that and pulling the questions out for our Q&A session at the end. But that is at the end of a phenomenal conversation that we shall have. How about right now? Cantor Mutlu, Abby, take it away.
Sounds good. All right. Is Abby here?
I'm here.
Oh, great. All right.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I'm hearing somebody's wind. Is that your wind?
I don't think so.
Maybe it's God. Maybe it's God.
It's God's wind.
First of all, I'm not again going to over praise you because, we have to be careful with that.
Very,
But
my head is already very shiny, you
But I
know.
just want to say that it is not just a pleasure to speak to you, but I think that all of us on this Zoom would agree with me that so much of our spirituality is what you do and what you bring us. And I've already gotten wrapped on the wrist for saying that this was conversations with rabbis and not clergy. It really should be all clergy. And it was one of those how to narrow an impossibly large area. And so I've already fumbled in that regard. But I just want to say personally that particularly through this pandemic, seeing you on Friday nights and obviously in your absolute circus of amazing lunch episodes, which I'm addicted to. You've been a lifeline and very much, I would say, though no one's asking, my spirituality is very tied with what you bring. So I just wanted to start with that. And now I'm going to grill you, if I could, mercilessly. Let's just start with the word need. Because I realized I had a great chat conversation with my group that we sort of are all defining it a little bit differently. When I ask that question, or when many people ask that question, how do you define need for you? Like, how is that word working for you?
Yeah, great. A great place to start. I would say that, it's something that is essential for survival, right? So, and that's what drew me to this question to begin with. And I was telling my group that when I saw the list of topics, I said, ooh, I want this one, I want this one. Does God need us? Because there's something so strong about that word need. And so essential, begging of, how to survive. And it led me to look at the fact that you can answer this question at complete polar opposites, and you even began with that, Abby, in your article, in your interview, which was really great. And I think because it's so stark, this idea of, is this something that is essential for survival? Does God survive, with us, because of us, as a result? And or does God not? So I guess I'll start it there, and I would say that, is God's existence made necessary by ours or our cooperation?
And so when you think about, we all the rabbis I've talked to have said that they don't really believe in an anthropomorphic God exactly, like God is a person, God is a being. But it's kind of hard to use language without being human-like, in this idea of God needing us. Even Rich Markowitz was saying in our room, the idea of God being needy, it's almost like an uncomfortable idea. It's certainly one we haven't necessarily explored. But how much is this an exchange? Like, so much of our prayer, so much of our liturgy is entreating God. It's asking God, it's praising God. where are we kind of getting back?
Right. Well, and we talked about that in our group too. It's almost like before you can even have the conversation, you have to, you have to lay some ground rules. There's some caveats, and there are things that are kind of surprising time and time again. And I think one of the things that's surprising is that many of the great Jewish thinkers, have thought about God completely differently from themselves, and also in ways that in our Western in our Western world would feel like completely ungodly and devoid of God. And I think we need to start from that base. And you're absolutely right that when we talk in ways that are kind of familiar, especially again in our Western world of anthropomorphizing God, that a lot of baggage will come up for us. And one thing that came up in our group was that in speaking with and in experiences where we've talked to people who are Orthodox or fundamentalist, the way of talking about God is just completely different. And when we think about the things that happen in the world, the pandemic, all of the terrible things that happen to people, and if we say that God acts in history and is anthropomorphic, a lot of our brains go haywire, and we just can't kind of get past that. So I think that it would be great if we could kind of survey everybody and see where everybody here in this room, in this Zoom room, stands on God, right? Stands on how they view God. Where's the baggage there? How does God act or not act in your life? But as soon as you use a word like need, as soon as you even talk about a relationship, there comes that human element, right? So, I think it makes it difficult for us to kind of go back to talking about fundamental concepts. So I think that's a great place to start as well. And I would say, for me personally, I went to an Orthodox yeshiva, and I sat in the classroom just saying to myself, scratching my head and saying, I don't really believe the God that these rabbis believe in. I don't believe that the earth is less than 6,000 years old. I don't believe that. And you know what? I would ask the rabbis, I said, what about dinosaurs? How do you explain that? And they would say, well, God works in mysterious ways. And it's just like, it's not satisfying. It's not a satisfying answer. And I came to Reform Judaism by reading about the philosophers, reading Borowitz and reading Kaplan and reading how, and being shocked actually that you could be Jewish and that a traditional belief in God was not a precursor, a prerequisite. That's one thing I want to say just to this group for this conversation. And I know it's difficult. We don't have the time to go through everyone, but a little tidbit there.
Well, just to acknowledge the barriers you're talking about, which I think is more widespread than often Jews admit, is that there are a lot of people who feel very connected to their Judaism and don't consider themselves people of faith. They don't consider themselves believers. Do you assume when you're talking to a congregant or when you're up there on the bima, whether it's a pastoral moment at a funeral or when you're in David Geffen Hall, that it's filled, that people are there because they have faith, they have some kind of faith?
I definitely don't assume that they have a kind of traditional, either from an Orthodox standpoint or in our greater Western world, which is largely not Jewish, right? I believe that people are coming together because it is a holy thing. It's a holy thing to come together in community and to be with each other and to support each other and to try to affect change in the world. And whether or not they say it or if they're comfortable saying it, what I personally believe is that is is a window into a godlike behavior, a godlike happening when people come together in love like that. And I would say that I just wrote an email today to a congregant who was asking me about this program and saying, well, but what if we don't believe in God? And again, it was the same kind of thing. Judaism, and this takes a lot of reminding. Judaism doesn't demand as a prerequisite to have a traditional faith in a Western sense of God. Naaseh v'nishma is we will come to understand by the doing. We will come around to understanding what God is, because it's so vast and so out of our mental faculties, by doing, by being with each other, by loving. And I believe I see that when people come together in prayer, come together in social action, and really especially these people that I see, these very committed congregants, on the screen, through all of the ways that you love each other and show your care and compassion in the world.
And just to get to that idea of, I think, action, and what you're saying, and I've seen it so much in the people in this Zoom room right now, is that sense of us being God's hands in the world, which it almost sounds like a Hallmark card, but I think that there's something urgent about it in our tradition, that it's not enough to, whether you call it God or not, to feel uplifted on a Friday night or to feel moved on Kol Nidre. It's kind of like, what are you doing? And that's where that question of whether God needs us, and at least Laura Frank was saying that when she thinks about the frontline workers, that there's God in those hospital rooms when someone is trying to make someone feel less alone, when, especially at the beginning of this pandemic, and so many people were suffering alone and having their last days or hours alone, what role those, not just the doctors, but the orderlies were playing in just being near those people for their last moments. Is there God there? Is that too convenient to say for you?
I would say absolutely there's God there, and I'm going to kind of get to that in a roundabout way. I started off by saying that what drew me to this question was kind of the polarity of it, and the way it makes you very easily jump from one to the other and saying, this can't be true, this has to be true. So, on the one hand, of course, God doesn't need us, right? If God forbid we were to cease to exist, there would still be God in our tradition. And our existence wasn't necessary for God's existence in the beginning of the Torah either. God simply was at the beginning before anything else happened. The earth was, or the universe was unformed and void. And then on the other hand, yes, absolutely, God does need us. And the ability that we humans have to act like God in being partners in creation, and I'll kind of explain a little more of that in a second, means that we can do God's work. We can do the work that God needs us to do, because, and I'm going kind of all the way back to that creation story where we're created on the sixth day, B'Tselem Elohim, in God's image, and just as we have the ability to destroy our planet and destroy each other, God needs us to take care of each other and take care of the planet, because what I believe, and I was talking about this in the other room, is that our very existence is proof of it's proof of love, that we're here together, and at least that's
what do you mean by that?
If why is there anything at all? Why are we here? Why does the Torah go through the process and say God did this, God did that? Because it was good, because it was a good thing, because it came out of love. is what we're taught like around the Shema, that God loves us, Shema Yisrael, and Ve'ahavta, we love God. That the relationship is built on that because it's built on creation. And so, when I say that God needs us to rebuild and care and heal, it's because that's a reflection on what God can do. And God can do, in the Torah, God can do bad things, right? God argues with Abraham on destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. And it's fascinating, actually, when you look at the Torah portion, because at first it says something like, I'm trying to remember, in the first Aliyah, after Sarah is told that she's going to bear a son, and she laughs. Is it really true? But I'm so old. And then God says, "Well, is anything hidden from me? Nothing's hidden. At the point of time, I will give you a son." And then right after that, God's kind of quote unquote walking around thinking about the Sodom and Gomorrah thing, and God says, should I hide this thing from Abraham? Like, I'm about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Should I tell him? It's super, super fascinating, this idea of like what's hidden, what's not, between us and God. And then God and Abraham continue to have this argument back and forth. If God didn't need that, then why did it happen? Now, ultimately, God did the destructive thing. And I kind of believe, in reading that story, that God, that wasn't godly. God must have been disappointed. Like, should have done that. That's kind of antithetical to what I do and what creation is. And at least that's how I approach it. And so just to come around to your question, when seeing the hospital workers and the first responders and the people helping people off their feet, and there's even love in, I was remarking, in the way that we pass each other now during this pandemic, kind of like when you're driving on a dark road and you turn off your brights right before you see a car approaching. The way we put up our masks, I feel like it's an act of protecting each other, and certainly not just us. And I don't want to blind you. I don't want to I don't want to get you sick, and I want to make you feel comfortable. And I feel like there's even God's hand in that.
I think that's beautiful. It also makes me I also do that flicker in my car if I know that there's a cop waiting for that.
Right.
I don't know if that's
good thing this is not being live streamed. So.
Right. Harriet had a question, which I think is operating for a lot of us. Is the pandemic a test for man? I would include it in women. For humans, I assume she means, to see if we can take care of each other. I love that question because it dovetails very much in what you were saying of that God created us and it was good, Tov, right? And it was good. God created man, God created Adam, and it was good. And you're kind of suggesting that, and now we have to kind of go right or left, right? It's how you're going to act in the world. It's not just that you exist. You have a choice to make every day about what you do and how kindly, how lovingly, how selfishly. And now we have something like we're thrown this plague, this scourge, right? None of us could have anticipated. And it's hard to know if God's working somehow and God's responsible in some way. That's a hard thing to imagine, as it is with any natural disaster, tsunami. Obviously, we don't even want to touch the Shoah right now. But all of those times where we say, if God is, at the wheel here, this is a hard thing to understand for a loving God. But we have this pandemic. Let's focus on it for a minute because it's so real for us. And to Harriet's question, is this a sense of our response, in a way, is part of why God needs us? That it's not that God controlled the pandemic, sent the pandemic, but it's something in the world, in the natural world, that happens. A virus, right, takes hold, and that now it's our response that we're going to see, where we're going to see God working.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I have a pull to both sides with this question too. I mean, especially in the context of God testing us, and when the first thing that popped into my mind was the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, when God says, or the Torah says that God put Abraham to the test, and then proceeded to say, take your son, your only one, the one you love, to be sacrificed, to offer him there to me. And you know, it's really interesting because I'm going to go back to this idea of kind of like a traditional interpretation versus a modern one. And for anybody who's studied Torah with me and looked at traditional commentaries, I usually like to kind of break down the traditional commentaries, because what we were saying before is that God, I don't believe that God acts in history in that way. And the test that I see in the Akedah, in the binding of Isaac, was really like a test of Judaism itself. And could Judaism survive if there were no more child sacrifice? If the first issue, the first fruits weren't God's anymore? And that was a big turning point, for Judaism, for the religion at that time. And it's an interesting thing to bring up too, because a lot of classical interpretations of that say that it was testing Abraham's faith, which again is not usually the road that I travel down. I think Abraham already had faith. Abraham was talking to God. Come on, like how much more, and seeing, God was making him promises and all this stuff. So the test I see is a much bigger, much more overarching thing, and it has to do with survival. And will the Jewish people survive? Will Judaism survive? And so in looking with that lens at the pandemic, and you already said it, like, did God come down and make this pandemic happen and say, let's see what you do with it? No, that's not what we believe. But is the pandemic itself, once again, testing how humanity responds to each other? Is it kind of putting at odds those two things again, of creation and destruction? And will we act in the reflection of God's creative, kind of original, primordial power, to make things and to heal? Or are we gonna, every person for themselves, and I'm gonna hoard this, and I'm doing okay, and I'm gonna, kind of shut up over here, and so in that sense, it's very much a test, and it has to do with survival. Because if we fail the test and we become insular, then and we have disregard for others, then very much in this pandemic, and we've seen the numbers and we've seen the way that the graphs work, then survival goes down. And so that's how I see this as a test.
Well, it's interesting because Wally Nathan said that he said, I believe for a long time that Abraham failed God's test, that he should have argued against killing his son. And it just makes me think, if we're just, putting the lens of this moment on that idea of having a dialogue with God. You just said it. Abraham was in conversation with God. Most of us don't get that kind of access. But that maybe if this is a test, that it is about, as Wally said, kind of pushing back. Not that we can't necessarily fight a virus we can't see, but what we can resist is this idea of the selfishness you talk about. This idea of we're just going to stay in our houses, we're going to do that isolation, not worry about someone who can't get food right now, not worry about the person who doesn't have someone they're living with right now. Again, this sense that, when you said B'Tselem Elohim, if not now, when has there been a moment when we really are all connected? And not just to each other at Central Synagogue, but to everyone in New York City and to someone in Wuhan, China, who might have come over here. We can actually not just help each other, but make each other sick. That's a very different kind of reciprocal relationship made really put in high relief, I think, that idea of being intertwined and therefore being responsible for each other. So I just wonder, like, it's in a way what you're saying is not just does God need us, but God is showing us how much we need each other, how much we need each other to stay healthy, to stay alive. You said survival, and to kind of like get through an incredibly hard trial. I don't know how you react to that at all.
Well, I want to jump in and first, just because I brought up the Akedah, just no, not shoot you down. Just to about the Akedah and this interesting thing of God failing the test. See, it depends what you think is the mindset of Abraham. I believe that Abraham never thought that God would actually want his son, and that this was a moment, kind of a demonstrative moment in Judaism. Anyway, we don't have to argue about the Akedah, and although there are some really incredible things that
we're going to do that when we're all back together. We'll do that
exactly exactly, and there are things in the text which show, kind of like really underscore how difficult this was, for Abraham, and certain things in the text. Anyway, I would say that, yeah, I mean, this is a moment where we again kind of we have this power, right? This power to change, to destroy, to heal, and I think that the test of this pandemic is a test for all of us. I mean, it's it's not a great analogy, but there's a kind of a warlike atmosphere quality about this, and we need to not only care for each other and actually heal each other and prevent people from getting sick, but we also have to keep our morale high, and I think that coming together in this way and talking to each other and answering these questions and doing the silly things and the serious things kind of keeps that morale high too, and keeps that connection strong. And I think that one of the biggest tests that I feel like we've really passed and we keep acing is, and you hear it every time when somebody talks about a program on Zoom or a life cycle on Zoom or whatever, a Shiva, and they say, kind of with this amazement in their eyes, like, I can't believe how I didn't think that this would be so meaningful, that I would have such a connection to somebody across like fiber optics or whatever it is. And we clergy have been in the position of trying to convince members, when there's a life cycle, not to wait to actually do your life cycle. Do it at the time that it's supposed to happen. There's something very sacred and special and holy about a time and a place for everything. And a b'nai mitzvah, is not supposed to happen when you're 15. I mean, sometimes it does happen, and God bless them, But like, if you had a b'nai mitzvah date, try to do it. And if you are mourning the loss of a parent, try to have that memorial, try to have that closure, try to get that Shiva going online. And the ones that, have listened have always come back and said, wow, that was incredible. I didn't think that would be so meaningful. I didn't think there would be so much connection. I think that's the test that we're passing, is that despite being apart from each other physically, we're able to strengthen those bonds of communication, those bonds of reciprocity that you talked about.
And everybody, we're going to go to questions in about 5 minutes, but I want to go a little personally with you, Dan, if you can stand it.
I'm here.
But I want to talk about how you sing and kind of what's happening to you in the moment. I mean, when those of us who have watched you and are in the room, for instance, during a Vina Malkeinu, I mean, during any Friday service or Saturday, but certainly at those sort of peak moments, I think Avini Mokim was one of them, or the Unatana Tokev, are you, to talk about, like, are you, if you can tell us, kind of feeling like you're speaking to God or connecting to God in that moment, aside from knowing all of the technical things that need to be happening to make a song work in a large space with people hearing it and feeling something? Like, can you talk about just what sort of your dialogue is with the divine, and particularly when you're singing?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. Thank you for bringing that up. Abby, you know that that I've dabbled in meditation, and meditation was something that I, like all the great things in my life, found accidentally. And I won't tell you the whole story, but basically, you wanted to learn to play harmonica, and the same author of this great harmonica book series also wrote a book on meditation, and I decided to try it out. And as an angst-filled teenager, it really changed my life. And I'd say in those moments, and it's hard to it's hard to get there. There's certain moments in the liturgy. There's certain moments in music that are easier to kind of access that that transcendence than others. And what I've always felt about meditation, that there's kind of a paradox there. You're trying to get rid of distractions. You're trying to have as quiet a room as possible. It's kind of an insular activity, and you're trying to move thoughts out of your mind and keep your mind clear. But with the ultimate goal of actually feeling that you're connected to something much bigger. And I would say that in those moments where I feel like I'm successful in communicating something musical and something powerful, that I'm kind of giving, there's a feeling and a sense of abandon, and that you're giving yourself over to that emotion or that phrase or that moment in the music, and it feels meditative, and it feels transcendent and godly, because you feel at that moment that you're part of something bigger. It's not about really the self and focusing on the craft and hitting the perfect high note or or any of that. It feels like it's a oneness, like trying to achieve a oneness. So, and I certainly feel a very high spiritual experience in those moments. And I would bring up just one more anecdote, and I love to talk about this. I used to sing at Trinity Church, Wall Street, and they would do a Messiah every year. And the big moment came for me to do the big tenor solo in I think it was 2006 or something, their Messiah, and I knew that a New York Times reviewer would be there. And I was scared to death. So my tactic was to practice the solo over and over and over and over and over again until it became so automatic that no matter how scared to death I was when I stepped up there to sing it, it would come out automatically. And it was a spiritual experience. It was a complete out-of-body experience, connecting musically to that moment. By the way, the text I sang is the text Nachamu, Nachamu, comfort ye. The music fans will know that text from Isaiah very well. And it was a sense of abandon and a process of kind of not eliminating the self, but actually kind of assimilating the self into as much around you as you possibly could.
We're going to go to questions in 1 minute, but I have one last one, particularly myself, because you had sent me a text when I asked you to in advance of the Shema Kolenu, and the last line: "Do not turn us away in our old season as our strength diminishes. Do not abandon us. Do not be far from us." I think that when we talk about needing God, God needs us, but we're about to enter a holiday where we're asking sort of plaintively for another year. We're asking to be written in the book of life at a time when many people are being written out of it. So it's always intense. I think it's more intense than ever, I would argue, right now, just because we've never quite lived through something like this. That idea then of the plaintiff request, the almost begging, the feeling of standing before an open ark and knowing that you're getting judged, and that there will be a verdict, and that we're not sure, frankly, we'll be standing there a year from now, is that kind of need. I find it powerful, but also terrifying. Like how, if you could just, I guess I know, and it's hard to ask you that in a brief way because we want to get to others, but can you just speak to that kind of, the need that's really asking?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, the construct of the High Holy Day prayers, it's there when you need it, right? There are some years where, it can feel like rote. I mean, you're doing it year after year, and maybe there's some years that you feel more fortunate than others. And when you sing the text, hear our voices, return our days as of old. Don't cast us away in our old age or in our frailty. Might not ring as true, but you're right. This year, these prayers are going to be that much more urgent. And I think that they're always urgent. We're always trying to channel that, but it's just more personal this time. And I chose that prayer as a prayer that I really connect to because, for one thing, the idea of hearing our voices, and I've always believed that anybody can sing. Everybody has a voice. Everybody can kind of communicate that that expression from within. And for us to be asking God at this time, to restore, our days kikedem as they used to be. I think it's going to be a much more emotional experience, but in a way it's going to be easier because we won't have to reach into a recess, into a memory maybe, where when did we really, really need God to restore us? When did we really need? And it's hard for a lot of us, when did we feel cast away in our frailty? But now, as a people, I mean, that's just right at the fore of our our existence and experience today.
Rabbi Berman, take it away. I'm sorry I went a little over time. This is our first. I'm not on task, but we can do a lot in 7 minutes.
That was great because you already asked a lot of the questions, so we're ahead of the game.
Okay. It's very rabbinic of you to make me feel better.
Oh gosh, my pleasure. Happy to do it. So I'm holding one question that I want to be the final question, but Rabbi Nicole Auerbach asked, does God needing us imply that God is incomplete? And a whole discussion ensued in the chat box, but it led to the follow-up question that if God's completeness and God needing us aren't mutually exclusive, maybe God needs us to move God along in how to achieve a unifying wholeness. Maybe God needs us to feel whole. So does holiness then occur by human action rather than being understood as something that is far away that we are trying to move towards? So there's a lot in that question, but
There's a ton. Of course, that's Rabbi Auerbach. I don't think it's every time. So Dan, you have to be as condensed as you can.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to try to do this in 2 seconds. Okay, I'm done. No, I would say that the biblical text shows us actually. I mean that this is a concept that's very familiar, that we move God along, and that the whole story of God really being present in the actions of history at the beginning of Torah, and then kind of leveling off as a way to almost wean us from that, also can be seen as a way of moving God along, and also giving us, kind of transferring us this power to make God more complete. in the world. And I think about, the Midrash and about, God approaching the nations with the Torah, and I really don't like this Midrash because I don't like the idea of chosenness. But, if God didn't need us, then why is God peddling the Torah around to a bunch of people? And what is the Torah to God? The Torah is kind of is like a blueprint to move things along, to achieve that holiness and that wholeness. I'm sure I didn't answer the question thoroughly, but that's
pretty
where I'll
darn
leave it.
good. Pretty darn good. Let's put our hands up. Then I know you're not asleep yet.
So I think maybe there's time for two questions. Um, One of them is very personal. Katie asks, how do we reconcile taking care of ourselves versus taking care of everyone else? And what does that say about our ability to help God perpetuate the world and God's will in the world and Judaism?
Well, I think Hillel said it best, right?
Really
Starting with taking care of ourselves. If I'm not for me, what am I? Who am I? What will I be? And it's through taking care of yourself, that you get to the second step, which is, if I'm only for myself, what am I? And I think of when you're on a plane and the oxygen masks come down and they instruct you, put it on yourself first, because if you don't have it on yourself, you're not going to be able to help others. And so I don't think we should feel that there's a diametrically opposed or a conflict between taking care of ourselves and taking care of each other during this pandemic, in these times, because I think we can't adequately take care and do the work we need to do if we're not starting from a place of self-love and self-care.
So I think that maybe our last question was actually the first question that was posed, and it comes from Harriet. Do you think that God needs us because humanity needs God?
That's such a good question. I want to ponder it for a second.
You don't have time, Dan.
What's it? No time for pondering. Okay.
Quickly.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
This is efficient Judaism.
I mean, I love that. I mean, it brings it right back to the kind of the reciprocity and the the circular aspect here, right? Is that we're a reflection of God, and the responsibility that we have for another is actually a way to kind of show God's self. And so I think that is, I think it's emphatically, I could say yes to that question. We do need God because, God needs us because, humanity needs God. Humanity needs this kind of blueprint of love and care for each other to help us survive and to help us thrive.
Abby, do you have any last thoughts?
I love that answer, and it's true to form that Dan can think on his feet on Zoom. These are I think some of the biggest questions. Truly, I mean, all kidding aside, but I'm very challenged by them and also very moved by the conversation. So I just want to say thanks to everyone again for going on this journey with us and for letting me be a little bit of the steward. But honestly, none of this is possible without this most amazing Central team that I feel like I wouldn't have God without Central. I really mean that. So that's my last statement of the night before I go have some wine, which I recommend.
You deserve it. Everybody here deserves it. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Cantor Mutlu, Abby, the whole team, and everybody who joined us and asked questions and participated. If you haven't already signed up, our next session, a week from tonight, will be Abby in conversation with Rabbi Ari Lorge, asking the question, what does God think about us? So have a wonderful week, everybody. Take care. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Bye.
Stay safe.